Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways. Alarm. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray and James Holland. And Jim, we're going to the movies today, aren't we? But
we are.
Not in our normal style, chewing over some movie from the 50s and perving on the Lancasters or whatever.
Or even sitting there going, well, I got that wrong.
Yeah, exactly, and saying those canoes are completely out of order. Who are we talking to today, and what are we talking about?
Well, we're talking to the director and writer of The Great Escaper. New movie that's out, starring Michael Caine, Glenda Jackson and John Standing, all of whom are completely brilliant in it. It's a fabulous script. It's beautifully shot. I absolutely loved it, and I was in total pieces and blubbing my eyes out like a pathetic schoolboy. It's Ollie Parker and Billy Ivory. So welcome, guys, and thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Nice
thank you for a treat. God, I loved it.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And in fact, I watched it this morning just now, and it's taken me. I've had 20 minutes, half an hour to pull myself together from the end of it. So you've done me some sort of damage, chaps.
Yeah. And it's
quite full on for a morning viewing.
Yeah. So listen, for those who don't know it, can you? I mean, rather than me doing it, Billy, can you just tell us a quick synopsis of plot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's based on a true story.
I remember it well.
2014. Yeah, a guy called Bernie Jordan, and he was staying in a care home in Brighton with his wife. He'd just moved in with his wife, who was receiving nursing help. So he had been living on his own and sort of visiting her daily. And they got to a stage where she had sufficient needs that he was living with her in the home. And he wanted to go on the 70th anniversary commemorations of the D-Day landings. And Bernie wanted to go and was told that he left it a bit late and that the official trip was full up, so basically he couldn't go, and he told everyone that he'd stay in Brighton and he'd do the necessary and commemorate the event from Brighton. But then all we know for sure is that he decided he was going to go on his own. He packed a toothbrush and his passport in a plastic bag, and he set off. He was spotted on the ferry going out there was a sort of 40s singing trio called the Candy Girls. There are pictures of him sort of half dancing, half falling over and tottering on the ship with them, bless him. And then he met another serviceman over there, and he invited him to stay in the Cosy Hotel at Ouistreham, which is where he stayed, Hotel Cosy. And then he didn't go to the main ceremony, and he made his way back. And by the time he got back, the care home had sort of slightly panicked about where he'd gone, and then the police got hold of it, and the media got hold of it as well, and it became a sort of a bit of a media circus in a way, because it then all became about where is he, and very much this hashtag that the police put out that he was the great escaper, that he'd legged it, and that's how, and from that kind of the myth was born, and our film's kind of about that really, and him polling up back in England and how he dealt with the whole experience.
I remember it very well, and it was really weird seeing that shot of Dan Snow with Hugh Edwards, because I was literally sitting next to him at some point on that day. I was out there too on the kind of pop-up studio over the Hotel de la Marine in Arromanches, and I remember it all really well. And I can remember the veterans out there all treated like kings and heroes, and quite right too. And it was incredible feeling of, it was a festival, it was absolutely amazing. And I also remember that was the one where Sophie Rayworth had to do the cover the ceremony in Ouistreham, and then had to cycle because she couldn't get back. She had to cycle back to Arromanches to do the 6 o'clock news from the pop-up studio. It's very funny. We were
because Obama was in town, wasn't he? So you couldn't move around the lodgement area.
But I remember it really well. But what presumably the fictional bit is the story of the tank guy.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because I was. My father, again, to digress massively, Ols had also had experience, family experience of the Second World War. My dad was in Bomber Command. He was in 50 Squadron, and he was flying out of Skellingthorpe in Lincolnshire, and he met my mum there. And it was really interesting that Dad had spoken about the war since I was a little boy, and I was saying that we'd muck about on the motorway because it was be a lot less crowded in those days, and occasionally if we had an old Ford Corsair, and he'd slow down late at night, me and my sister, and he'd say, right, we're at the end of the runway, Waddington or Skellingthorpe. He said, right, we're going to push it through the gate, and then he'd just floor it, and we'd go as fast as we could. But it was all very much boys' own stuff, and I used to get all the comics, Battle Action, Commando, all the D-Day Dawson, I used to do all that. And then when he was in his 80s, just 6 weeks before he died, he said, I want to talk to you about the war. And it was a different rendering of the war, and of his experience. And his brother, my Uncle Lawrence, was shot down and killed on a raid over Essen. And in the film, actually Essen is talked about. And I went out, I can remember it was a weird thing going out with some mates. We went out to Rheinberg, the war cemetery at Rheinberg, where a lot of Allied airmen are, and I remember Dad, and I rang my dad because mobile phones, it only it was a big thing. I said, Dad, I've found Uncle Lawrence's grave, and my dad had never seen it, and knew he was, and it was very odd because there was an extra. They had a second pilot flying that night, and he was buried, so there were 8 of them, and right. But it was just this weird thing that so much of what Dad had been a big drinker, and he'd been a phenomenal fighter, and as a lot of Bomber Command people had after the war, because they had PTSD, but it wasn't dealt with, and it wasn't really diagnosed. And so what was interesting about Bernie's story was that when we looked into what he'd done after the war, he'd done an awful lot of doing. He'd been the Lord Mayor. He'd worked as a church warden. He was an electrician who could never do enough for people, and there was just this sense really early on of a man who was potentially dealing with survivor guilt, I thought, and so the question then was, how do you dramatise that? And what we wanted to do, me and Ol, was we wanted to do it kind of in an unusual way, and actually doing it through a love story, and that's kind of which was where Glenda's character came in, and that's how kind of we constructed the sort of ballast, within the facts that we had.
It's absolutely beautifully done, and the bit of the graves I thought was really good. I had this really, really big moment at the 75th, and I was on the kind of BBC studio thing, and then when the service at Bayeux was over, we sort of wandered out into the cemetery, and there was an old boy there in his wheelchair, and he said, "Oh, I've just found my mate. I've just found my mate." And he said, "I can remember him dying." He said, "I can remember exactly what happened." He said, we were being mortared really heavily, and he suddenly lost it, and he jumped up from his split trench and started charging towards the enemy, and they just cut him down." And he said, that was 75 years ago, and I'm now 98, and he was 18. And, he didn't need to say any more because we all thought, he was thinking, I've had 80 years that this boy hasn't had. And it was incredibly, profoundly touching moment. And I felt what you did was very true to that, weirdly, to that moment that has remained very kind of seared in my memory.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I've had an experience not unlike that as well in Normandy, where there's a 15-year-old paratrooper buried in one of the Normandy war graves, CWGC places. That idea that they shall not grow old. Well, no, they won't, because they can't. And I think I thought that was the other really beautiful thing is that in the film is the idea of, well, this is the happy ending. This is that people wanted, which is them in their old people's home together. And you portray that very well, of the sort of obviously the the daily sort of wear and tear of being in an old people's home and dealing with the people and what the people who work there have to deal with and all that, and then the adventure spinning out of that of him going to France. I thought that was beautifully portrayed. The other thing that really struck me about the film was I've seen Michael Caine in so many war films.
Yeah,
right. He's Colonel Vandeleur in A Bridge Too Far, for heaven's sake. He's an iconic war film actor, if nothing else. So to have him do the film where the man who's been in war digests war is an absolute masterstroke, an effect of casting. I mean, he's a sensational cinema actor and doesn't have to do a thing, and you're there with him.
He's absolutely brilliant. He's so brilliant. But don't you think, Al, you just go, really? He's 90? How can that be?
The whole thing. I mean, obviously, time burns off fast, and as one careers through one's middle 50s, you start to ponder the passage of years and all that sort of stuff. And having Michael Caine in this film, in the film where you're talking about war trauma and survivor's guilt and the things people went through and the things people had to say to each other in difficult times, because that's a big part of the thing he's carrying, isn't it? To have this man from all these war films is. I mean, Ollie, surely you get Michael Caine, you high five yourself, you open a bottle of something very special when the casting is sealed. Yeah.
No, it was. Billy and I had conversations early on, and who would be our perfect cast, and Michael from the beginning was the man. And as you say, that thing of and the fact that he's been a soldier, you know, he just has. That's a kind of club that you belong to. He was career, wasn't he? And yeah, exactly. And he has that. He also has that. He's seen some stuff out there and wouldn't talk about it. And and yet he's got this fabulous kind of persona, which is very like Bernie, kind of mischievous and playful. But you know there are these depths beneath that which make him fascinating. And so he was there. And then Glenda too, you know, it was something about capturing that working class girl who still has the fire. You know, and Glenda, you know, amazing. Just to meet her, she's astonishing.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and so it's kind of a weird dream, but that thing, as you're implying it, almost like there were certain things in real life that chimed with the story, and of course, Glenda and that character have a particularly kind of poignant.
Well, quite, because of course, you know, she's tragically no longer with us, and you know, I was thinking that all the way through. I was thinking, you know, here she is, and this absolute tour de force performance, and yet she is no longer there, and the words she's saying about, oh, I've had a good life, and you know, and you know, I'm basically no regrets kind of thing. You could almost imagine Glenda Jackson saying that for real, couldn't you? I mean,
absolutely. And there was something also about her too, where obviously it was very sad when we got the news, and the film had just finished. But you move back a little bit and you go, what a hell of a way to go. To actually do a performance like that with such kind of intensity and this fire. We at the premiere, we had some of her family turn up, and they were absolutely tickled by it because they said it was so full of her. She's always her, Glenda. You know, whatever you look at, there's this kind of particular energy and strength. But they said this was just what Billy had written, which really, I think, got under the skin of the character, but also what we'd managed to capture by her freestyling. You know, quite a lot of the little noises and improvisations are her muttering away. Oh, bugger off, she says, you know, when someone comes in, she doesn't want to see him. She's just muttering away to herself. And they said they hadn't seen her so much of herself. And the one thing, though, that was quite amusing, when they said, you know, she has this friendship and relationship with poodles, they said that was the most striking thing because she hates dogs. And of course she has this connection.
That's very funny.
Which I thought was very funny.
That's very funny. I think the other thing is also, you know, so much about filmmaking these days is and TV as well. And Al and I remember we were talking about this while we were crossing over the Zorpa Dam, and I was saying I'm sick of everything being so fast and quick, and everyone's in a hurry the whole time with TV, and I'm always in a hurry with everything, but not when it comes to watching stuff. I like things to breathe. I like to sort of linger a little bit, and I like the long views and the GVs, the general views and stuff to kind of just pause and sort of take it all in. And what's lovely about this film is the pace of it is just, it's just absolutely on the money. It's just the right speed, and it allows you to kind of linger on all the expressions. And there's a great phrase, as you well know, which is show don't tell. And you do that really, really fantastically. You don't need to explain. The script is beautifully spare because quite often you don't need to say anything. You just need to linger on Michael Caine's face or on John Standing's face or Glenda's face, and you know what's going through their mind, and it's just beautifully, beautifully done. I honestly can't congratulate you enough.
Well, you can. That's great. Keep congratulating. It's lovely.
Yeah, come on, Jim. Be realistic.
Oh. Yeah, I really, really loved it, and I'm pretty hard to please as Al is with anything that relating to the war. And obviously, just as I was really getting into it, then you have the Sherwood Rangers, which is
that's
my
exactly
regiment,
what I was,
and just icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned.
Is he an invented name? But why the Sherwood Rangers? I mean, I think I can guess, but why did you choose the Sherwood Rangers? Yeomanry, Billy Ivory of Nottingham.
Well, yeah. Well, I was going to say it can't be because Jim Clark's tank is done in Sherwood Rangers colours, because I know Jim's only too happy to tot out his Sherman and change decals wherever he likes.
Genuinely, it is, dare I say it, obviously it's the Nottingham link, but also one of the things I was really interested in was, ever since Private Ryan, and you got to do D-Day, you go, great, we haven't got $6 million to spend on it, and the whole sort of, but also it's established a kind of vernacular that I remember seeing that, being at the pictures that we've seen Saving Private Ryan, and that first 15 minutes, as I'm sure we all did, thinking, wow, that's just kind of changed everything in terms of But one of the things I was interested in, and actually was something that we just simply couldn't do because we couldn't get what we needed, which I wanted to, was the idea of the DD Shermans with the skirts around them, the floating Shermans. So as written originally, what we had a sequence in which we were going to show the first lot of them going off, and of course what happened, I think there were about 7 or 8 of them just sank. They trialled them on, it was something like the Erewash Dam or something. It was completely flat, wasn't it? Where they trialled them, and that's it. And they'd gone, lo and behold, look, the skirts work. It works. And the sequence, what we talked about trying to get was the idea of Bernie on his first trip in, seeing the first lot of tanks go, and we've got various images that we were hoping to get of sort of a bit like there's an amazing bit in Robert Altman's thing about the paratroopers in the Second World War, the American paratroopers, called Streamers, which is a stage play, and he talks about the thing that they all fear is the streamer, which is looking up and seeing the parachute just doing that because it hasn't opened, it's just flapping and this sort of and so I had this idea of an image of the tank underwater and just hearing this banging of somebody hitting hearing this clang, 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 and then the skirt that was supposed to keep them afloat just trailing behind. But it was impossible to do. I think, we could locate one of those skirts, couldn't we?
Yeah, and also it was, the budget of the film was very tight.
Yeah.
And so in some ways it focuses the mind. So everything is very spare, the whole film. You never saw the outside of the boat he was on.
Yeah.
Because we just built a tiny little corner and used 2 tanks to block the vision, and then added a couple of CGI shots here and there. And to do the justice to that with the skirts, you'd have to connect with water properly. And water is one of the most expensive things to do in VFX. And certainly the schedule wouldn't get us out into the water for real. So, yeah, it's one of those things. It's interesting because I love that detail when I read it. I loved all that thing about inflating the skirts and build-up of the tension. But there was also something where, in a way, we had to keep those flashbacks very, very lean. And in a way, they were slightly more impressionistic in the end. We had a fantastic DP, a man called Chris Ross, and a brilliant designer, Nick Palmer. And we all worked together to find a way of doing it as economically and yet not kind of cheesily as possible. So we really, and it was all about having water thrown at you, using the use of the camera. Chris was using his thighs all the time to get the movement. We looked at gimbals. We couldn't really go to a gimbal on that budget. So it was everybody pulling together and creating each image at its extremist. He actually found this wonderful lens, Chris, or he has it actually. I think it's a late Victorian lens, which has a particular aberration in it and gives you a particular look. And so all these things started to build and create the world of the past for us. But it was all done slightly on the back of an envelope in terms of the scale of it.
You'd never know that.
I think you pulled it off.
No, I assumed you'd been on the landing craft down at Portsmouth. I thought you'd used that and hung a green behind for the backgrounds.
We were on an airstrip where we just built a few little things, and but it does make you just absolutely concentrate on. When you have more money, it's lovely. But occasionally it means you shoot more than you want, and then you decide later. Here we almost had to cut the whole thing before we were shooting it. You know,
the thing that we had going for us in some respects was that to kind of, it's always the way with storytelling is that you want, to get the general, you need to be as specific as you can be, because I think there are truths that resonate and they go out and because that sort of Bernie's journey was so much about this one bloke, and the fact that one of the things they did beautifully is that shot of the eyes of them just looking at each other, when he's saying when Douglas says to him, you went in the first time, what was it like? And that look on Bernie's face where he's kind of going, I could tell him the truth that there were bodies floating, or what I'm going to do. He's not going to get off the boat, and he's got to get off. And that thing of, again, which is something Dad used to say to me, that when you were on a final bomb run, they used to give them speed, wakey pills just to help them on their way, and he said, the creep back they used to go on. He said because you just wanted to drop the bombs and get out as fast as you could, and in the same way, I think, for Bernie, he wants to do his duty, but he doesn't want to die. Nobody wants to die, and I think that you sort of you do get a real sense, in those sequences of him with Douglas. Just he's almost warming to him despite himself. He doesn't want, but it's a friendship that tortures him for 70 years because just in those...
It's a friendship of half an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. And suddenly it's kind of like... And it's so supercharged because of where they are. But he has to do it.
Amazing bit of writing on Billy's part, I have to say, because, to describe the story as you were at the opening there, Billy, it could easily have fallen foul of sentimentality, and it could easily. And I thought when I knew it was coming my way as a script, I thought it might have been, sweet and kind of feel good. But then, as it progressed as a story, the layers and the poignancy just became irresistible as a story to tell.
But I've always found this sense of the passage of time incredibly touching and moving. This idea that these guys were kind of incredibly young ones. I mean, I've been lucky enough to interview a lot of veterans over the years, and sometimes it's hard to transport the 80-year-old man, or even the 90-year-old man, or even the 100-year-old man, as the guy we had on the podcast last week, but from what they are when you're looking at them and talking to them, to who they were as a 21-year-old. Time is such a hard thing to get your head around, isn't it? And we've touched on that already today. Al and I in our 50s and kind of, starting to feel the passage of time and Sniper Alley and all that kind of stuff. But you do. Time isn't a straight line, is it? It's and how you get from that young man to the person they become is really interesting, and all those people that are left behind. It's such a powerful thing.
And I think that's one of the things that the films at Payne's to point out. And I think that, one of my favourite scenes in it, and it's an amazing moment, the performance and just is when, and it's the bit you talked about, James, when young Reenie's in the factory and the police come in and they give the give the bad news. Yeah. But then she runs out to the cliff top and all the Lancasters fly over. But it's just
good CGI, by the way.
It's fantastic, isn't it? It's fantastic. I mean, that bit. Really good. I'm afraid, like Dickens, I cry at my own work. But at that point, because I hadn't seen that until and it just made me think of my dad, and my uncle Lawrence. But what was interesting was that point where she's looking out. And like many people, many wives, girlfriends did in the Second World War, and you have a choice whether to engage or not with what's happening at war. And I find it interesting. I was reading something the other day about the highest suicide rates anywhere in the world currently are in areas of, particularly in Serbian areas of the Balkans. People who've gone to war and probably done some pretty bleak things, dealing with that as time passes, as it goes on. And I think the thing about the Great Escaper is that that scene where Reenie looks across the water and it's just an amazing moment for me, that she kind of goes, I can't really deal with that. I just need to be tough. I need to keep my eyes ahead. And as she says when she comes back to Danielle, to the care assistant, she says, what you do is you keep your eyes forward, you keep your head down, or bad things happen. And I think the idea that during the Second World War, or any war, there are, it's not just those who are in combat who are fighting, and I think that's one of the things that I'm most happy about with the film, is just the sense that they can't consummate their love. These two people who've been absolutely faithful to each other for 70 years, that relationship is unconsummated until he tells her what happened to that young lad on the beach.
I thought one of the other really, really smart things is, that's in the script is Nathan, the character of Nathan. The idea of showing, because otherwise, what can happen? I think when you do things. The Second World War, I think a lot of people are convinced was fought by 80-year-olds. Men on Zimmer frames came off landing craft. It's young people who go to war. So to have a contemporary young person, we only left Afghanistan, 6-7 years ago. There is a whole load of people who are living with their war experiences in our society right now. And I thought that to have him in the story, what unfolds with him, and which I don't want to spoil for anyone. I thought that was really deft, because it said that war goes on. It's not an old story. It's a current one, and people have to live with it whenever it happened, not just in the 40s, but in the early 2000s or whatever. I thought,
well, boy, isn't it now? Jeepers.
Well, and right now, I mean, so
can I just mention? I had to do some interviews recently with some war vets, and there was this youngish woman who'd flown a Chinook in Afghanistan, and they'd all seen the film, and she said that film is my story. Yeah. And it was incredible in terms of time collapsing, because she said what I did was I'd land the Chinook and the ramp would go down and 30 young men would run out, and you'd hope 30 would come back, and sometimes they wouldn't. And you just got this sense of her complicity to the whole thing. It was just
interesting.
God.
Isn't that interesting? I also thought, I really enjoyed John Standing's character. I thought that was really nicely done.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, because you do want to get that breadth of experience, and the thing about the younger guy who's there with his, also, as he says, I'm also a veteran, and you're looking at him thinking, but you're a kid, a veteran means 80, doesn't it? A veteran means 90, and you're going, actually no, you're a boy, and. And I have to say, because again, I think one of the things that really, nothing to do with me, but beautiful and well, exquisitely achieved is the performances of the sort of supporting characters, because you get Glenda Jackson, you get Michael Caine, and it's very easy then. Sometimes, or I've seen films where there's an imbalance, and you everybody else just does feel like they're around the edges, and they're not always either the performances aren't at the same notch or they're not contributing in the same way. But I think his performance is fabulous, and I think and the fact that his trauma is acted out by the fact that he's the young cheeky chappie. He's literally going to become Michael Caine. Because, we see him, don't we, on the boat, and he's saying, come on, lads, off you get, fight him on the beaches. He's the bloke who's the life and soul of the party. And when he gets home at 11 o'clock at night, he's sobbing. And nobody sees that. They just say, God, he was wanting a laugh. He had 14 pints again tonight. And that bit where he got on the table and dropped his trousers, and, it's all that kind of stuff. And it's funny because I'm working on something else about the Falklands. Was talking to a guy who had been, had been on Sir Galahad and was very much that character, the one he'd said, I always had a joke, I always had a laugh, and and then wheels had come off when he was about 50, and but I think it's really important that just that idea of that it just keeps getting repeated, sadly.
But also the power of memory is something you were really creating in the story, in terms of here's a man who can't hold them back, his memories. They're kind of attacking him, and he has to confront them. And she, on the other hand, is somebody who's trying to corral her memories because she knows there's a kind of end not far off. So, and yet those memories, as much as she tries to put them into some kind of order and shape, go out of whack and start to attack her too. And so it's as you say, it's almost the fierceness of that which makes time collapse. There was an amazing moment, actually, not just even the bad memories, the stuff, that performance Glenda gives when she's looking out to sea at 4:15 in the morning and remembering the time they made love. And she does it with this incredible kind of vigor. I expected her when we were rushing through the scenes. Oh, this is her looking out to sea, wistful kind of thing. But yet you get this almost erotic rapture from this old woman, and it's just stunning. I find it.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wasn't quite sure how to articulate how I felt about that scene. But that's exactly what it has. This extraordinary erotic charge, which again is just a part of what we don't think of old people as well. That they're supposed to have parked that by the time you get old, aren't they? I thought. I've always been a fan of your writing, Billy, but I have to say it's a truly tremendous piece of work, and in its realisationally as well, it's incredible.
So easy to have tripped over into mawkishness, and it just doesn't. It's just not. I cannot imagine anyone with an interest in this subject matter not loving this film. So huge congratulations to you both. I think it's brilliant.
But they don't even need an interest in the subject
matter.
No,
they don't. But the people who are listening to this podcast do have an interest in the subject. Yes. So basically what I'm saying is, anyone who's listening to this, go and see it, because it's really good.
And any factual errors, I apologise for, obviously.
No. I thought it was pretty spot on.
Well, I don't know.
Switch the beach next time, but don't worry about
it. I did a thing a few years ago with a Lancaster in it called Night Flight, and I was waiting for, and I got a letter from a bloke in Canada, and it had been a hell of a job, to try and get, because we looked at buying a Lancaster first of all. We thought about, in terms of making the film, we'd try and buy the Canadian one, and it was going to cost about 14 million at the time, and the budget for the film was about $500,000. So that went by the by, and in the end we used that. We went to Bray Studios. We used a tail section we'd been dug out of a field not that long before in Holland, which we knocked the bumps out of. Then we had a midsection which was built by a coach builder, and the front section was a guy in Winchester who was restoring the cockpit of a Lancaster bomber, and he had it sticking out the front of his garage. His wife had left him, the kids had left him, as he painstakingly over 50 years put this thing together. But we used this thing, and and it was on a big ramp, and we thought we'd done really well to get some great footage. And then I got the first letter that said, I noticed that the engines that you used in your recording were the Vulture Mark IV, and not the Rolls-Royce V12 of that particular Lancaster bomber. And it had taken me 63 drafts in 10 years to get that film made.
That's so funny.
You weren't
not quite ready for that, anyway.
Amazing. Brilliant.
Funny. Well, listen, both of you, thanks so much for coming on. Congratulations on the film. It's terrific, and it's been great. It's been great having just watched it to then be able to kind of sort of gush about it and chat to you about it.
The Great Escaper. In all cinemas now, and probably on a streaming platform shortly. That the way the world goes, it's a tragedy, isn't it? That you don't have to wait 2 years for a film like you did in the old days.
I used to love that.
I used to like that. It made it all special.
Yeah, the special Christmas when you got the Christmas Day one or the Boxing Day movie.
Exactly,
it's a big thing.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.
Cheerio.